The Olympics have a pattern. Rio went broke. Athens is still recovering. And Montreal, it took them 30 years just to pay off the debt. Every single one of these cities was sold the same dream. The games would pay for themselves. But they never did. Now it's Brisbane's turn.
Brisbane will host the 2032 Olympic Games.
The Games are coming back to Australia.
I award it to Brisbane, Australia.
And once again, they made the same promise. This would be cost neutral. But that promise is already falling apart. The budget hasn't just gone up, it's skyrocketed. The plans keep changing. First they announce and then scrap it completely. And then the real turning point came when a Queensland Premier broke his own election promise on camera. And everyone's only talking about the stadiums and venues. That's not even where the real money is going. The real cost is buried somewhere else entirely, and it's so much bigger. However, this whole Olympic bidding process was made possible by a system which is designed by an Australian. Someone who wasn't just watching from the outside, he was sitting on both sides of the deal. And what he built didn't just hand Brisbane the Olympics, it set the trap that Brisbane is now stuck inside. Brisbane didn't win the Olympics, it was chosen. There was no dramatic bidding war, no global race, no final battle against another city. By the time the decision was made, Brisbane was basically alone. It walked in as the only serious option, and walked out with the biggest sporting event on the planet. And that should make you ask one question. How? This didn't happen because Brisbane had the perfect plan. It happened because the Olympics had a problem, a big one. There used to be a time when hosting the Olympics was the ultimate flex for a country. It wasn't just about sport, it was about power, status, a place on the world stage. That's what Japan did in 1964. Just 19 years after the Second World War, Japan wasn't just hosting the Games. It was rebuilding its image in front of the entire planet. In 2008, China used the Olympics for the same reason. They didn't spend tens of billions to make a profit. That was never the point. It spent the money to send a message that a new superpower had arrived.
Look at this place. The fact that there's so many people coming to take a look. This was China presenting itself. This was China becoming a big power and showing itself to the rest of the world.
The Olympics wasn't just a sporting event. It was a stage, a global platform to prove your nation. And that's why for decades, the fight to host the Olympics was brutal. But slowly, the image started to crack. The same event that once helped countries build their image started damaging it, and Rio was one of the clearest warnings. In 2016, Rio got the hosting rights for the Olympics.
To announce that the Games of the 31st Olympiad are awarded to the city of Rio de Janeiro.
It was about to become the first city in South America to hold the Games. The government believed the Games could help transform Rio and boost the economy. But once the cameras left, the reality looked very different. Rio spent around $13 billion to host 2 weeks of sport, and within months, some of the venues were already sitting empty. The Olympic Park, the place that was supposed to become a symbol of progress, started looking more like a ghost town. A country already struggling with poverty, corruption, and economic crisis was left carrying the weight of an Olympic bill. Instead of proving that the Olympics could transform a city, Rio became proof of something else. After that, cities started realizing that winning the Olympics might be the most expensive mistake they could make. By the time Tokyo 2020, only 3 cities even bothered to bid, and for 2024, out of 5 cities, 3 of them pulled out. Suddenly, the International Olympic Committee was facing something it never thought possible, a future where nobody wanted the Games because the cost was too hard to justify. So the IOC did something that had never happened in more than a century of Olympic history. Instead of choosing one host, they gave away 2 games on the same day. Officially, they called it a new era of partnership. But in reality, the organisation was in survival mode. The IOC wasn't being generous. It was scared that if it didn't lock both cities in immediately, one of them might walk away too. For 2032 Olympics, the IOC didn't just change the rules, it changed the whole game. No more public bidding war, no more cities fighting for it, no dramatic final showdown in front of the world. Instead, the IOC moved everything into a much quieter system and a future host commission working behind closed doors. And that's where Brisbane entered the story. At the beginning, other cities had shown interest, but under the IOC's new process, they didn't face each other in a public race. One by one, they faded into the background. And then in February 2021, Brisbane was named the preferred candidate, and from that moment, the race was basically over. 5 months later in Tokyo, 72 out of 77 members voted yes, and just like that, Brisbane had the Olympics. But that decision didn't come out of nowhere. It came from a new system. And one of the men behind that system was Australian, John Coates, one of the most powerful figures in Australian sport. He held 2 roles that put him on both sides of the Olympic process: Vice President of the IOC, the body that awards the Games, and President of the Australian Olympic Committee, the body that bids for them. And things got even more interesting in 2019 when Coates played a key role in shaping a new Olympic bidding system. 2 years later, that same process delivered 2032 Games to Brisbane without a single rival bid. There was criticism, questions about transparency, about influence, but the IOC moved quickly to shut it down. They maintained that John Coates had recused himself from all discussions related to Brisbane. But this wasn't the first time Coates' name had been tied to controversy. In 2008, he openly admitted that Australia had bought the Sydney Olympics. The money was linked to the Olympic committees of Kenya and Uganda, and Sydney won the Olympics by just 2 votes. Coates wasn't just connected to that story, he was central to it. And decades later, the same name appeared again in Brisbane's Olympic story. Brisbane got the Olympics through a system shaped by one of its own. It looked like a victory for Australia, but winning the bid was only the beginning. Because the Games don't just need approval from the Olympic Committee, they also need approval from the people. And for that, Brisbane needed a promise. Something simple, something powerful, something that made the Olympics sound safe. But that promise was about to collapse faster and harder than anyone expected. When it started, the promise sounded perfect. There were no plans for a massive construction project that would drain public money. 84% of the venues were either existing or temporary. The operating budget was $4.9 billion, with just $690 million for temporary venue infrastructure. In fact, they said the Games could deliver up to $8.1 billion in economic and social benefits for Queensland, and more than $17.6 billion for Australia. But the promise lasted only about 18 months. In February 2023, the federal and state governments reached their first major funding deal. And suddenly, the old $690 million figure no longer told the story. The new venue infrastructure program was $7.1 billion, a massive leap from the original pitch before Brisbane had even started building. And that was just the beginning of the collapse. The first domino to fall was the Gabba, Brisbane's iconic sporting ground, which is home to cricket, AFL, and some of Queensland's biggest sporting moments. The Gabba was supposed to become the centerpiece for Olympics, a $1 billion rebuild to host the opening ceremony. But 2 years later, that number exploded to $2.7 billion, and to make room for an Olympic warm-up track, they were going to demolish a 120-year-old primary school. And all of it was unfolding in the middle of a housing crisis.
Well, Australians are living through the worst housing crisis in decades.
The proposal quickly sparked outrage and protests began to spread. The Gabba rebuild became politically toxic, and by early 2024, the government was forced to order an independent review. Then the review dropped the bombshell. They decided to scrap the Gabba plan entirely as it was too much disruption. Instead, the review pointed to something much bigger, a brand new $3.4 billion stadium at Victoria Park. A massive Olympic stadium right in the heart of Brisbane with around 63,000 seats. It would have been the main stage of the Games, hosting opening and closing ceremonies and becoming a symbol of the Olympics in Queensland. But in the middle of a housing crisis, a project of this scale was always going to divide opinion. So the government stepped back and chose a cheaper option instead. Cusack. An old stadium from the 1980s, sitting far away from the city centre, was suddenly supposed to host the biggest sporting event on Earth. The plan was to spend around $1.6 billion upgrading it mostly with temporary grandstands that would be pulled down after the Games. But the reaction was brutal. Athletes and Olympic officials were unhappy because it would have been the smallest Olympic stadium since 1928. Instead of saving money, it made Brisbane the laughingstock of the sporting world. And for the first time, Brisbane Olympics started looking less like a smart Olympics and more like a city trying to host the world while arguing with itself. Then in the 2024 election, a new government came to power. David Crisafulli became the Premier of Queensland with a very clear promise: no new Olympic stadium. He specifically ruled out Victoria Park.
Now, if you're asking me whether or not I support a new stadium, the answer is no, and I've been clear about that.
But after just 5 months, Crisafulli stood at a podium and did the unthinkable. He broke his core election promise on camera.
With delivering it. At the centre of the plan will be a Brisbane stadium built at Victoria Park.
Admitting the suburban track plan was too embarrassing to go ahead, so he decided to do the one thing he had promised not to do: a new stadium at Victoria Park. The exact place he'd promised it would never go. But now he is going with a new price tag of $3.8 billion. And the Gabba will be demolished after the games and turned it into housing apartments. All those years of argument and billions in planning for a stadium, that is going to be knocked down regardless. He apologised on camera, but locals are not happy with it.
And I have to own that, and I will, and I am sorry.
Because Victoria Park is not just empty land. It's one of Brisbane's most important cultural and green spaces. Around 1,200 trees are expected to come down for this project. And that's why protests are growing, petitions are piling up, but the government keeps defending the decision. And on top of that, they passed legislation to bypass 15 different planning laws, including the Environmental Protection Act. The Olympics was sold to the world as sustainable, but now it's destroying sacred land and green space. From no new stadiums to $3.8 billion, that's how fast the promise fell apart. And it didn't stop there. There was another major project, Brisbane Arena. They sold it as the ultimate mega venue. Basically, one giant space for everything, from Olympics, swimming to concerts. The federal government committed $2.5 billion to make it happen, but the planning for the project just kept changing. And when new government came to power, they accused the previous government of a massive cover-up. Deputy Premier Jared Blay claimed that extra costs were deliberately hidden from the public. Because of those rising costs, they pulled the Brisbane Arena from the Olympic roadmap. And with Brisbane Live gone, they had nowhere to hold the swimming. So they had to start completely from scratch. The plan was a brand new National Aquatic Centre, which would cost $650 million. But just 5 months later, that number exploded to $1.2 billion. If just 2 buildings cost $5 billion, that leaves only a fraction of the budget. The government still believes with that remaining money, they can demolish an entire concrete stadium, build and upgrade 15 extra venues, and pull together the complex temporary overlays for 20 other locations. And what makes this even harder is that the costs haven't stopped climbing yet. Since Brisbane won the bid, construction costs in Queensland have already skyrocketed by 38%. And the workforce problem is just as serious. The state needs up to 40,000 extra construction workers every year just to stay on track.
The shortage of construction workers in Queensland will cause building delays and cost blowout. Queensland has done the maths. We're already about 15,000 workers short, but that's projected to rise to 35,000 in 2028.
All of this is happening in one of the worst construction environments Queensland has ever faced, which means that price tag is guaranteed to explode. The government keeps insisting the games are still within $7.1 billion, but at this point, that number feels less like a budget and more like a guess. And honestly, none of this should be surprising. An Oxford University study tracked decades of Olympic data and found that on average, the games go over budget by 156%. No Olympics in history has ever been delivered on budget. It's the biggest financial gamble, and Australia already knows this. Sydney Olympics. One of the greatest Olympic Games ever held. The opening ceremony, the crowds, the atmosphere, everything was an absolute masterpiece. For 2 weeks, Australia was the centre of the universe, and the whole world was applauding. It looked like the perfect Olympics, but perfection came with a price. It still went 90% over budget. Financially, Sydney was a loss, but what it gave Australia was something money can't buy. Back in 2000, this was a country still searching for global validation, and Sydney was a chance to prove that we belonged on the exact same stage as the world's top-tier nations. But today, we don't need to prove anything. The world already knows Australia is a fully modern nation. So if the games won't make money, then why are we spending billions to tell the world something it already knows? Especially when there's a housing crisis, hospitals struggling, and schools are underfunded. For regional leaders, the spending is the absolute breaking point. North Queensland Representative Nick Demetto said it straight, that the rest of the state is being ignored, while Brisbane gets billions in dollars. And everyone is arguing over that $7.1 billion. But that's not even the full picture. It's just the tip of the iceberg. It completely ignores the operational costs, the athlete villages, and most importantly, how they're going to move everyone. Because these games aren't happening in one city. They are stretched across 1,700 kilometers of coastline. And when you have to move millions of people across all of that, an expensive Olympics can very quickly turn into total chaos. The 2032 Olympics will not be a compact games like Paris or London. It will spread across 9 separate locations. The government is promoting this as the Games for All Queensland. They believe spreading the games will boost regional economies and create more jobs in tourism and hospitality across the state. However, this ambitious approach also brings serious practical challenges. The distance from Cairns to Brisbane is roughly the same as London to Madrid. No Olympics host has ever attempted at this scale. For years, the political arguments and media headlines have been hyper-focused on stadiums. The public has watched politicians fight over a $7.1 billion. But while everyone was arguing about stadiums, the far bigger cost was hiding in plain sight. They've got to move millions of spectators, athletes, officials, and staff between all these different sites for 2 full weeks. And for that, they need massive transport projects. Cross River Rail. This isn't just any ordinary train line. It's a massive underground rail project deep under the Brisbane River and right through the heart of the city. This project wasn't originally built for the Olympics. In fact, it had been in planning for over a decade, long before Brisbane even won the Games. It was originally promised at $5.4 billion and supposed to open by 2024. Now the cost has blown out to around $19 billion, and it won't open until 2029 at the earliest. And if we look across the whole state, the list keeps growing. A brand new rail link to the Sunshine Coast, faster rail between 3 cities, and major upgrades to the Bruce Highway stretching all the way up to Cairns, plus the Coomera Connector, Brisbane Metro expansion, new stations, bus corridors and roadworks in every host city. All these transport upgrades combined are now heading toward $40 billion. Right now, you might be asking yourself, weren't these projects going to be built anyway? Isn't this actually long-term planning? You're right. Queensland is one of Australia's fastest growing states. These upgrades are genuinely needed for future growth and daily commuters, not just the Olympics. But this is where things get complicated. Every one of these projects has been fast-tracked and supersized because of Olympics. Instead of spreading the cost comfortably over many years, Queensland is now being forced to pay for decades of backlog all at once in the middle of the worst cost of living crisis. And the pressure doesn't stop with transport. Since the Games will be hosted in 9 different cities, Brisbane is building 4 entirely new villages in different locations. When you compare it to Paris and the upcoming Los Angeles Games, the difference is massive. Los Angeles is using existing venues and not building any new permanent ones. Paris built only 1 new venue. But Brisbane, we're looking at 7 brand new venues, 4 brand new athlete villages, and a historic stadium being demolished. The estimated cost for athlete villages is around $3.5 billion, mostly paid by private developers. After the Games, they'll be turned into permanent housing and sold or rented at full market prices. In theory, this could add new homes to Queensland. But the big question is, how many will actually be affordable? We don't know the answer to that. And the financial uncertainty doesn't stop with the construction, because on top of all that, the true cost of actually running the event is still a complete mystery. We still need a completely separate budget just to run the daily operations of the Games. This includes security, medical services, catering, transport, broadcasting, staffing, and venue management across 9 cities for 2 weeks. The original plan said it would cost $4.9 billion, fully paid by tickets and sponsors. But then, Brisbane 2032 President Andrew Liveris stood in front of the IOC and admitted the $4.9 billion figure bears no resemblance to reality.
We had the bid budget, and that bears no resemblance to reality, especially right now. So we are working with the IOC on the revised budget.
The people running the show are openly saying they don't know what the final bill will be, and with only 6 years left, they still haven't finished revising the plan. Brisbane believed they were smarter than others. They skipped the bidding process and promised sensible games built on existing venues. But in the end, they fell for the same trap, that this time, the Olympics would be different. In August 2032, the world will arrive for 2 weeks of spectacle and unforgettable sporting moments. The crowds will cheer, the flame will burn bright, and the cameras will capture the magic. Then, just like always, the Olympic Committee and the visitors will pack up and leave. The Olympic flame will be extinguished, and the cameras move on to the next host city. What remains is new infrastructure and the enormous final bill, which will belong to Queensland for decades. In the end, the real test for Brisbane isn't whether it can deliver 2 weeks of glory. It's whether the long-term costs and trade-offs will actually be worth it for the people who call Queensland home.